How much time do you spend in the summer heat carrying individual buckets of water to your olive trees so that they don't shrivel up in the summer heat? Well, none. Those root systems go deep. How much time do you spend out in your olive grove with your rake and hoe chopping down the weeds so that the weeds don't grow up and crowd out the olive trees? Well, none. Do you think the grass growing around the base of the olive trees in the bottom photograph is going to damage the olive trees any? It doesn't bother the olive trees. What do you do during the growing season? Well, you do something very important. Every once in a while, you take a look at the olive trees. When olives ripen, then you start to harvest them. When you have enough harvested to collect, then you put them in a big press. When you have enough collected to make it worthwhile to spend an afternoon making some olive oil, then you put the olives into a press. You squeeze out the oil. Olives off the tree, by the way, have almost nothing to do with olives that you buy in the jar at the grocery store. Olives off the tree are like so full of oil, they're like, you hold one off, the grease starts running down your arm. They've got to be pressed and then dried and lye, believe it or not, to loosen up the fibers. They're inedible without this process. Anyway, you collect the olives, you squeeze out all that oil that they're just soaked in, and then you go back to watching the olive trees. As more olives ripen, you harvest them, and it makes sense to make some more olive oil some afternoon. You make some more olive oil. And then at the end of the growing season, you load up all your barrels of olive oil on the back of a wagon, take them down to the dock, and hope somebody shows up with a boat from somewhere else with 40 acres of wheat to trade for your olive oil. And what that means is that you've effectively fed a family, a good-sized family, for a year with about 6 weeks of work. It's not too bad. It's not too shabby. You got a side job to bring in some cash for some other things. You've got a pretty nice life, and you've certainly provided food for your family for a year with about 6 weeks of work. Now, grapevines take a little bit more work, but not that much more work. You don't have to plant them every year. Grapevines will produce for decades, if not centuries. You have to get out when it's the coldest part of the year and cut the vines back, and that's not a lot of fun, but you have to do that. But you certainly don't have to irrigate them. I mean, you might carry water to them if it hasn't rained for a couple of weeks, but nothing like beans. You don't have to worry so much about weeds. You know, you might cut back the weeds maybe twice in a growing season just to do it, but they're certainly not going to crowd out your grape harvest. They might improve your harvest a little bit. It might be worth doing it, but certainly nothing like growing beans, that kind of intensive labor. And what this decision means, this decision to rely on these two products in particular, olive oil and wine, is that you have an awful lot of people, not everybody, but an awful lot of people, and a lot more people than you might think. A lot bigger part of the population than you might think. We've got access to something that hardly anybody in the ancient world did have access to, and that's something important to me, and that's leisure time. Time to do all kinds of things. Time maybe to walk through your olive grove and think to yourself, well, I'm fortunate that my grandparents planted these olive trees. I didn't even have to plant them the first time. You know, I wish I knew more about my grandparents. I don't know much about them. I know that my grandfather fought in a war. I don't really know much about that war, but you know, I'll bet somebody in town's written a book about that war. The next time I'm in town, I'm going to stop by the library and check out that book and read it and see if I can learn something about the war that my grandfather fought in. Time to do what you and I think of as history, which is more than just making up stories about the ancestors and that kind of thing, but looking for documents and looking for evidence and looking for argument about why things have happened the way that they have happened, and to learn lessons to see what in the future we can do to avoid certain problems. Time to do history. Time to do all kinds of things. Time maybe to walk over to that stone wall that separates your olive grove from your neighbor's olive grove, and your neighbor's over there, you wave at him, he walks over, and you spend a few minutes talking about the weather, and then you start talking about politics in town. And once you've stopped complaining about all the politicians you don't like and all that kind of stuff, well, then you have a serious conversation about politics. Well, what is our major problem in the city, and how should we best use power to solve the problem? That's the issue of politics. Well, it would be the best form of government to have a sophisticated conversation about politics. Time to do all kinds of things. Maybe time to come back from a shopping trip into town and say, you know, our favorite playwright wrote a new play this weekend, or it's being produced this weekend at a theater in town. Maybe this weekend we'll go into town and watch a play in the theater. Time to do all kinds of things. Time to just think about things. Time maybe just to sit next to your mountain stream and pick up a stone and throw that stone in the water and watch it sink to the bottom and think to yourself, and then reach over and pick up a stick and throw the stick in the water and watch it float downstream and think to yourself, I wonder why. Why does wood float in water and rocks sink in water? I wonder why. Oh, rocks are heavier than wood. Duh, I guess I figured that one out pretty fast. But wait a second, no, that doesn't make sense. Because you can take a little rock that weighs nothing. You can take a grain of sand, a little rock that weighs nothing, and you throw it in the water, it sinks down to the bottom. But now I've been down to the docks, and I've seen ships made out of wood that must weigh 10 or 20 tons. And they go floating across the water just fine. And last time I was at a lake, I saw a tree log floating out there. It must have weighed, I don't know, 300 pounds. And it floats just fine, but I pick up this little rock that weighs nothing, and it sinks down to the bottom. What about rocks make them sink in water and wood float in water? I don't know, but next time I'm going to stop by where the scientists hang out, and I'm going to ask, because I'd just like to know. I'm sure one of them has a theory to explain why things happen the way that I see them happening. Time to do what you and I think of as science. Time to do all kinds of things.